So let's get this straight. The European Union is determined to become the world leader in combating climate change. We've got the Green Deal, a Green Industrial Plan, Fit for 55, and a whole cluster of other environmental initiatives nobody really understands. Yet Brussels continues to ignore the potential of high-speed rail to contribute to reaching climate targets and reducing emissions, improving labour mobility, cutting travel times, and achieving a more integrated cross-border single market. The reality is that multiple proposals exist for building out an enlarged pan-European high-speed rail network. What doesn't exist, however, is the political will in Brussels to make this a key priority. Here's 4 things the EU should do to get high-speed rail back on track. First, acknowledge that the existing EU action plan to boost cross-border rail is insufficient. What is needed is an EU rail authority with the sole objective of tripling routes designed for high-speed services by 2050, while also focusing on cross-border linkages. Second, Europe needs to learn from its mistakes. Cost overruns, design delays, construction weaknesses, and often dubious baseline projections are causing many projects to just wither on the vine. Just look at the much-needed Rail Baltica project linking Tallinn, Vilnius and Riga. Effective management control is essential, particularly for cross-border projects. Third, the EU should implement a dedicated budget line to provide ring-fence spending for high-speed rail projects. This budget could be comprised of existing allocations, supplemented by mobility-related funds currently distributed across other EU programmes. Finally, the EU should learn from the United States about how private companies can stimulate high-speed rail construction. The ongoing Las Vegas-Los Angeles high-speed rail project provides a perfect example of how private investment can be matched with government support through private activity bonds.